I was saying, like, how long have you been in the artillery? And he said, oh, well, we found a gun. We found a Russian gun. And I was like, what? He said, it had no wheels and there was some bits missing. He said, but before that, we were a mortar unit, but then we found this gun, so we kept it. The Russians had abandoned it. And he said that over a couple of months, they found some wheels for it, and then they found some sights. And I was like, well, how did you learn to fire it? Did you go train? He said, oh, YouTube.
No.
And I just loved it. After, like, you learn to shoot it on YouTube, and they're going, yeah, we're actually pretty good shots. We've been in Kherson 6 months now. We came down to make a film, and there's not been a single day where the Russians haven't shelled us. Not a day. Because they're a mile away, they're 1.5 miles away on the other side of the Dnipro River. So where you see other places getting hit by Shahed drones and ballistic missiles, in Kherson, they don't need to do that. Standard artillery just pummels the city daily. So it's just part of life. And, it's had a big effect. It was about 320,000 people. They estimate that about 30,000 people left. And that is due just to the Russian army, just with rockets and heavy artillery daily. They just hit the place.
And Paul, before we started this interview, you told me you've had to move house 4 times.
Yes. Well, we got here, and I think on the first day we just met some old babushkas on the street corner, and we were asking them about life. I was filming, and then the next morning we got a call saying, come to where you did the interview. And we went to the outside the house where we did, and the house was gone, just absolutely flattened. And what had happened is someone had seen us. There's still a lot of collaborators, Russian, in the city. So you've got to be very careful. But they'd seen us, assumed it was our house. And the following morning, it was just removed from the map. We went back to the place we'd moved. We were actually staying. And Zarina was on the Skype call. Then a grad rocket hit the back of the building and took out all the windows in that house. So we had this was within 3 days of being here, and we thought this is great. So now we moved to a kind of post-Soviet era housing block, which was quite anonymous. But the other day we went out to do an interview, and we heard the rocket. We went to meet a soldier, and we just heard the rocket go overhead, and to be honest, we didn't even think anything about it. You hear them that often. We had the huge explosion, went and did the interview, and we came back. And at first someone said the cafe where we drink coffee is being hit. So we went there, and he said, no, we think it's by your place. So we drove around, pulled up at our place, and looked up, and the apartment I'm looking at it now, it's about 10 meters away, had taken a direct hit. But our apartment, when we turned around and looked at it, it was like there was all the kitchen and living room area windows were blasted through. And we came up in the whole place that, there's now shrapnel holes in all the walls. And then they came and they call it Ukrainian glass. It's basically wood. They fit all the windows with wood. So now we live in like this kind of really dark hole. We got one little window like that lets light in. It's like permanent winter now. We just sit there kind of going. And then about 2 months ago, around Christmas, a shell came across and landed in the balcony below us, at the apartment below, and that was called a flechette. It was like an artillery shell, but it's full of about 2,000 small steel arrows. And that hit in the balcony below, missed us by about 4 meters, but filled the apartment below with these tiny, short, like stained steel arrows. So, yeah, we've had our share of misses here.
How does your documenting of this war compare with your other experiences? And do you feel that you have more of a reason to stay in Ukraine? Do you feel that you want to be there for the long haul?
Yeah, well, I think with Ukraine, because it was a long time after getting blown up in Syria, it was a long time before I could walk and then, getting fit and healthy again. So there was a huge gap between the 2012 And when the Frontline Club, when it kicked off, they said, we want to train young journalists, do you fancy going out there? And I was like, yeah, I'll go on. So I wrote up a course, a 2-day HEFAT and safety course. And when you see the enthusiasm of the young journalists out there to cover it, that spreads. So I did my training, and I was like, oh, I wonder if I still have got, I hadn't been near an explosion since the explosion that killed Marie and got me. So I was unsure.
Yeah, so you're referring to, Paul, just sorry to interrupt, but just to explain to people that this is the experience that you had in Syria, where your colleague Marie Colvin died, and this was after covering the protests in Homs.
Yeah.
And you wrote about that in your book Under the Wire, which I mentioned at the beginning. Yes, sorry, you were saying that I'm interested in what drives you really.
Well, it was I watched them going out, training for 2 days and go out, and I mean so I was like, yeah, good on you, going. These are local journalists who were covering dog shows until Russia invaded. They were just doing what local journalists do. Then all of a sudden they're on the front. So I saw that, and I saw their enthusiasm. So I went out myself to take some pictures, and I very quickly got over the kind of, will I be okay on the front line again? And then once I realised it was like, well, this is what I do. The kind of, I had that big break in between because of injury. But once I was there, and you just can't help but look at the Ukrainian spirit and go, yeah, I want to follow this through. And the film, it's the same with the film. We came for a few weeks, and it's like, no, there's more to it than a quick in-out film. This is like characters, and it's going to be a hell of an edit, because there's going to be a very big story kind of woven into a narrative.
And when you take your pictures, your stills, what do you look for in a photograph in a place like Kherson or in Ukraine?
Well, it's like every picture. I kind of, I had the luxury of working with Marie, so it was kind of like, the words and the pictures always made up were great in the two parts. But when I take a picture, I'm quite aware that I'm trying to tell a story in one frame. And I never imagine putting captions on. I always think it should stand without captions. It should be a story in itself, and and it's different from shooting film. When I'm shooting film and video, I never shoot the same on the same day. I never do both, because they're such different things. With stills, you have to just sit and watch and really, really, really hone in and pick your moment, and try and capture the whole story in one go. Whereas with film, you're doing interviews. It's a different. So I keep them separate. And some days I'll go out just to do stills, and it's the ultimate objective is to tell the story in one picture, and that is a challenge. But when it comes off, it's also a really nice. I got it.
And Paul, what can you tell us about what did they tell you about living under Russian occupation?
Oh, horrendous! The stories, they're just. They were big on torture, so they suspected anybody. They had these torture chambers spread across the city. We went to one yesterday that was formerly a yoga studio, and they would, people went in and didn't, a lot went in and didn't come out. We've spoken to victims who did go through the machine, and just, it's brutal. But they're still there, and they're alive to tell the story, so they're telling their stories. But it was just so widespread, and they really tried to erase any sense of Ukraine. So we've got a lovely guy, Volodya, who tells us about every morning what was he described it? They play their moronic anthem across the Russian national anthem across the big speakers in the square. And they'd raise the Russian flag, and and he laughs. He's saying, they were absolutely believed they could get rid of the Ukrainian concept of Ukraine. That's what they tried to. It's an example of what's in store for the country. If God forbid they break through, there will be there has been carnage, but if they break through and do what they've done everywhere else.
How are people feeling about I mean, you talk about how close the Russians are to where you are now. How afraid are they're going to come back?
There's always rumors. They are afraid, and they're quite they watch what's happening. They see the kind of world, the kind of plodding supply of weapons. That should be. They see this. They understand it. And obviously other things happen that take away some of the headlines. You get Palestine. Everybody knew when Israel and Gaza kicked off, a lot of journalists exodus and went to cover the next war. It's the circus moves on, but they're aware of that, and it's a genuine fear that the Russians will come back. There's no. They more than anyone know their capabilities, and they will fight to the last man. But without the weaponry and without the resources, it's horrendous. I mean, thankfully here they can't just pop back across the river because the bridges went. So they'd have some warning because they'd have to go round and come down. So there's a bit of leeway, but there's always the latest rumours that the Russians come back, but. The evidence is Russia is rearming, is rebuilding, is remobilizing, and they are devoting massive 30% of their economy now is as a war economy. They're building, and that's just not happening.
What if? Tell me about meeting Ukrainian soldiers. What have they told you, and where have you been?
Oh, I was just out yesterday. I think it was. I was out with a unit. The artillery unit we were with, they were fantastic. They're just I was artillery as well, so I've got a bit of an affinity with. But we arrived. We had to leave at 2 a.m. under the cover of darkness because of the drones, and they took us.
Where was this?
Where was it?
Where'd you go to? Yeah,
it was just up the river. I can't be too specific about
precise.
it.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah,
somewhere up the river. And everything takes place at night, and we were taken out by a red torch, and we just went down these muddy steps into this, basically an underground room with 4 guys in it, and they were like, hello, visitors, what are you doing here? But they were just lovely, such lovely guys. But I was saying, like, how long have you been in the artillery? And he said, oh, well, we found a gun, we found a Russian gun. And I was like, what? He said, it had no wheels and there were some bits missing. He said, but before that, we were a mortar unit, but then we found this gun, so we kept it. The Russians had abandoned it. And he said that over a couple of months, they found some wheels for it, and then they found some sights. And I was like, well, how did you learn to fire it? Did you go train? He said, oh, YouTube.
No.
And I just loved it. After, like, you learn to shoot it on YouTube, and they're going, yeah, we're actually pretty good shots. But they live this existence. They live underground and deep, about 6-7 foot underground with wooden beams and piles of earth. But they're using ammunition that they went out and scavenged in the woods, ammunition they found that the Russians had left behind. So everywhere you go, you get this sense that the ammunition is running out. You look at the eastern front of Divka up to around Kramatorsk, that area. The Russians are pushing, and we were speaking to one lad yesterday, a reconnaissance unit, and he said they are. He said there's a lot of the Russians are too thick, but he said they are learning, they are adopting. They're copying Ukraine tactics. So it's an ever-developing kind of, technological war with the drones, which are a complete game changer. But he said their tactics it's a mini arms race out there at the moment, certainly with the drones.
You've been watching Frontline for Times Radio. My thanks to Louis Sykes, our producer. To support the work of Frontline, hit the subscribe button. You can also listen to Times Radio throughout the day or read it at times.co.uk. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.